From a company that helped the Nazis track down Jews, to a company that gave away materials Hitler could use in his gas chambers, these are the famous American companies with disturbing ties to Nazi Germany. In the summer of 1937 in Berlin, the president of IBM, a sharply dressed American businessman named Thomas Watson, sat at a banquet table beneath enormous swastika banners while Nazi officials leaned in to shake his hand. He was there to collect a medal. The Order of the German Eagle with a star, one of the highest honors the Reich ever handed to a foreigner, was pinned on the chest of the man who ran America's most respected technology company. And he smiled for the cameras as if this were just another good year for business. And business was really good because IBM's German branch, a company called Dehomag, had spent years quietly renting Hitler's government something nobody else could offer at that scale, which was the ability to count people. Their punch card machines, the great clacking ancestors of the computer, could take an entire population and sort it like a deck of cards, and the German state wanted to know exactly who lived inside its borders. So the cards were printed with little boxes, and the boxes asked questions, and one of those questions was your religion. A hole punched in one column meant Jewish. A hole in another meant the camp you'd been sent to, and in the column for how you left that camp, there was a code for release, a code for natural death, and a code, number 6, that simply meant the gas chamber. The machines didn't kill anyone. They just made the killing faster, neater, and more profitable, and IBM counted that profit the same way it counted everything else. Watson finally handed the medal back in 1940, long after he'd seen exactly what it was for. One summer evening in 1938 in Dearborn, Michigan, Henry Ford stood in a banquet hall and let 2 German diplomats drape a sash across his chest. The medal hanging from it was also a Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the biggest German honor, and it was being handed to an American on his birthday in his own hometown, with a room full of guests applauding the whole thing. Hitler had picked Ford personally and not as a polite gesture because the admiration ran genuinely deep. Deep enough that Hitler kept a life-sized portrait of Henry Ford hanging beside his desk in Munich and told visitors the American was his inspiration. The thing that earned that adoration wasn't just the cars. Years earlier, Ford had bought a newspaper and used it to publish a long series of vicious articles blaming Jewish people for the world's problems, and those articles were bound into a book called The International Jew, translated into German and passed around the early Nazi movement like a holy text. So by the time the war started, the relationship was already decades old, and Ford's German factory simply kept the engine running. Ford Werke stopped making cars entirely and switched to building trucks for the German army. The same trucks that hauled soldiers across every country Germany invaded, and it built them with people who had no choice because by 1943, about half the workforce were foreign captives. And in 1944, the SS started delivering prisoners straight from the Buchenwald concentration camp to the assembly line, where they worked 12-hour shifts on a couple hundred grams of bread a day. Many of those prisoners didn't survive it. They died from the conditions, and they died when Allied bombs fell on the factory, because the captives had been housed in flimsy huts with no shelter while the German staff were kept safe. So the raids meant to stop the trucks, mostly kill the people forced to build them. All this happened while Henry Ford was making a ton of money. In 1936 Berlin, an ambitious German executive named Max Keith stood in the middle of Hitler's Olympic Games watching his product outsell everything in sight. Because Keith ran Coca-Cola's German operation, and under the Nazis it was booming. Coke was at the rallies, Coke was at the stadiums, Coke trucks rolled through the streets past buildings draped in swastika banners, and at the company's own conventions, the German staff would finish the festivities by throwing up their arms and giving a threefold Sieg Heil to Hitler. Then the war arrived and threw a wench in the profits because once the United States and Germany were enemies, the trade embargo cut off the secret Coca-Cola syrup that came from America, and suddenly Keith had a fully staffed German soda empire with nothing to actually put in the bottles. A normal person might have shut the doors and waited it out. Keith did the opposite because he was not about to let a little thing like a world war interrupt business. So he gathered his chemists and told them to invent a brand new drink out of whatever scraps the wartime economy had lying around. And what they came up was genuinely made from leftovers. things like apple fibers, fruit pulp, beet sugar, and whey, which is the runny stuff left over from making cheese. A salesman pitched a name based on the German word for imagination, and they shortened it to Fanta. It sold 3 million cases inside Nazi Germany by 1943, keeping the home front refreshed while the war raged on. When it was all over, Keith gathered up the profits he'd made under Hitler and handed the whole operation, Fanta included, right back to Atlanta. Coca-Cola kept the drink. So the orange soda, sold all over the world today, was born for one reason, which was to keep the bottles moving in Hitler's Germany. In 1940, in freshly occupied Paris, the manager of Chase National Bank's French branch, a man named Carlos Niederman, sat at his desk watching German tanks roll past the window and decided this was, all things considered, a fantastic business opportunity. Chase was one of America's biggest banks, a direct ancestor of the J.P. Morgan Chase that exists today, and rather than quietly closing up shop in a Nazi-held city, Niederman leaned in. He started working hand-in-hand with the German authorities, and one of the first things on the to-do list was going through his own customer records and freezing the accounts of every Jewish client the bank had, locking them out of their own money on behalf of the people who had just invaded. And he was proud of it. Niederman wrote letters back to his bosses in Manhattan bragging that the branch was held in very special esteem by senior German officials, and that thanks to all this cooperation, the deposits were pouring in faster than ever. But here's what freezing those accounts actually meant, because in 1940, money wasn't just money to a Jewish family in Paris. It was the bribe for a border guard, the price of a forged visa, the boat ticket out before the train started running east. Lock a family out of their savings and you don't just inconvenience them, you trap them in a city that is about to start deporting Jews to the camps. So while families were being quietly cornered, the American manager who held the key to their money was sending cheerful progress reports across the Atlantic about how good the relationship with the Nazis was for business. But the Paris branch wasn't even the whole story, because back home, Chase had spent years quietly running a different hustle. The German government was selling discounted currency to German Americans, and a lot of that cheap money came from Jewish refugees who had been forced to abandon their wealth when they fled. Chase happily processed the deals, helped funnel over $20 million toward Germany, and pocketed more than $500,000 in commissions for its trouble. The full picture stayed buried for decades until declassified Treasury reports and a lawsuit in the 1990s finally laid it out. An American bank had figured out how to make money off Jewish people running from Hitler, and then made more money off the ones who couldn't. In the 1930s in Midland, Michigan, the chemical company run by Willard Dow controlled something the modern world was about to fight over, which was magnesium, a light silvery metal that burns with a furious white flame and was perfect for two things: building aircraft and building bombs. Dow was basically the only company making it in all of America. Then Dow quietly linked arms with IG Farben, the enormous German chemical company that would later become infamous for making the gas used in the death camps. By linking up with this German company, they could agree on the prices on the market and keep profits high. But that wasn't only what the agreement concerned. A part of the agreement was that America would keep its magnesium output tiny, around 1/20th of what Germany was pumping out. So while Hitler was openly building for war, an American company had agreed to keep America's supply of a critical war metal deliberately small, just to protect everyone's profits. But here's where it gets even more insane. The American-produced magnesium didn't just stay at home. Nazi Germany bought up large stocks of it, and that metal went straight into incendiary bombs, the firebombs designed to turn entire city blocks into walls of flame. So an American company was quite literally feeding the weapons that rained fire down on Europe. The whole scheme got dragged into the light by a U.S. Senate committee led by a then little-known senator named Harry Truman, but almost nobody paid a real price for it. No executive went to prison. And in the cruelest twist of all, once the war finally exposed how badly America needed magnesium, the government handed Dow huge contracts to build the very supply the cartel had spent years suppressing. In the 1930s in the United States, General Electric, one of the most trusted names in American industry, held the patents on tungsten carbide, an incredibly hard material used to make the cutting tools that shape metal. If you wanted to machine the steel for engines, shells, or guns, you needed this stuff, which made it about as strategic as a material can get in wartime. Instead of flooding America with it, General Electric made a deal with Krupp, the colossal German arms manufacturer building the cannons and tanks of Hitler's military. The two agreed to carve up the market and choke the supply, and the greed was almost cartoonish because they drove the American price of tungsten carbide from around $48 a pound to $453, nearly 10 times higher, deliberately kept scarce right as the country was about to need every ounce. But the truly damning part was what General Electric handed over in return, because the company gave Krupp a complete list of every American business licensed to make tungsten carbide and how much each was producing, so it can get as much as it needed for its war machine.